Okay, so we're going to go ahead and talk about transforming data. Now, pretty much when you're transforming data, you're answering the question, what happens when we make shifts in our data? So, like if we took the data set and we added 3 to every value, what would happen? If we took, the data set and multiplied each value by 3, what would happen to the summary statistics? So pretty much that is what we're honing in on in this case. So we're going to start and look at the examples we have here. For instance, the first problem said we have the rules for the mean. So we'll go through and we'll do the rules for the means first. So if I had a data set that says, oops, I need to add 10 inches to our team's height. So how do we figure out the new mean without calculating? Well, if I added 10 inches to each one, the new mean would just equal the old plus 10. Okay, you could also just kind of use some scripts. This means population mean, new, take the old mean, plus 10. Okay, everything would shift, so the mean would shift as well. That would change. Okay, now if we're talking about the same situation and we want to know what would happen to the standard deviation. Well, your standard deviation is variability. So if I had added 10 to everything in the data set, the distance between them and how variable they are would stay the same. So in this case, the old would equal the new, or we could say the standard deviation of the old would equal the standard deviation of the new. Okay, that could also be written with population, but I'm just going to use the sample mean there. Okay, so you have the rules for the means. If I add or subtract something to it, I'm going to have the old plus 10. When I'm adding or subtracting, the standard deviation wouldn't change. Okay, now if I need to multiply something by, so it said, oops, I need to convert to inches, so I'm going to multiply all by 2.54. So what would happen here is my new mean would equal the old times 2.54. Or I could say the new mean, actually we'll scribble that out, so that's going to be, that's going to be our old mean times 2.54. Now, whereas when you're adding and subtracting, your standard deviation stayed the same. If I'm multiplying, depending on how large something is, it's going to change. So just like with the mean, you're going to multiply your standard deviation. So what I'm going to have right here is my new is going to equal my old times the 2.54, or my new standard deviation is going to equal my old standard deviation times 2.54. Now, if I'm adding and then multiplying, my new would equal the old plus 10 times the 2.54. Now for this one, the adding wouldn't change, so I would just leave that out, but the old would be multiplied by 2.54. Remember, with your standard deviation, adding and subtracting doesn't change anything. Now if I multiply and then adding, my new would equal, I'm just going to say 2.54 times my old plus 10. But here the same thing, the adding doesn't affect anything. So I'm going to have my old times the 2.54. Okay, so here's some examples. So pretty much when I'm adding or subtracting, my standard deviation is going to stay the same, but if I'm adding and subtracting the same values to all the values in the data set, I would do the same thing to my mean. If I'm multiplying or dividing, I'd multiply or divide the new mean, and I would do the same thing for the standard deviation. So down at the bottom of the page in your notebook, let's just kind of go for the general rules. So the general rule is if I add, subtract, Okay, you're going to do the same to find the new mean. The standard deviation stays the same. I should move that over. Zoom out a little bit so the standard deviation would stay the same. Okay, so if I'm adding or subtracting any value to my entire data set, you do the same to find the new mean, the standard deviation stays the same. If I'm multiplying or dividing, I'm going to do the same to find the new mean. And in this case, multiplying and dividing, do the same to find the new standard deviation. Okay, let me move that up, leave that there so you can copy it down.